Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to take a look at this piece today. It's a very beautiful piece, but it has some of the same issues we saw last class, which is a stunted canvas size that's kind of forced you, if you haven't noticed, or sometimes when the canvas is the exact same size from the beginning to the end, sometimes that it affects the growth or the gesture line or the length of the figure that we're drawing. So the best way to study figures is to have a large canvas and then bring in your brush and then just make sure you have nice breathing room for all the gesture lines that you do. Never try to do it where you do the figure sketch in the full canvas, because these edges, whether you know it or not, become aware of your anxieties when you draw. The best thing to do is always become aware of your anxieties. The reason why is because they encourage you to make mistakes. They encourage you to make mistakes that you will not be conscious of because they're a result of the anxiety in the painting. If you think you don't have drawing anxiety or drawer artist anxiety, you do. Everybody has it. It's the sense of stress that comes with performance and an efficient performance. So there is constant mistake making, reviewing your mistakes, noticing your mistakes, and then freaking out about them. All of this comes out of that anxiety, or is like a manifestation of that anxiety, and a lot of it comes out of the edge of the canvas. There's also the empty canvas that causes, that starts the ball rolling for the drawer's anxiety or artist's anxiety. What you have to do is always become aware of it. Notice when it's happening to you. It's kind of like a nervous feeling. When I paint, the edge of the canvas freaks me out. So in order to counter that, I started zooming out some more, knowing exactly where it was. If you zoom in, you don't really know how close you're getting to the edge, and you might not gauge the amount of breathing room that you need. So that's one question. I see a lot of spot rendering, a lot of hover rendering happening around your painting, and it's a sign that you might have zoomed in too much. And that's why leading up into the neck, let's just get a quick circle. Leading up into the neck, the space seems to be, and then we turn this on and off. If you don't notice it, or if you notice it now, you can see that the head is really, really short or low. It's like she has no neckline. Yeah, she's leaning forward, but it's not a bird's eye view lean forward, so meaning that the head is actually in front of the torso in the angle. Her shoulder line is still pretty balanced. We're seeing the stomach area. Let's say the head was in a position where, we had the head shape, and then we had the torso, and then we have the legs, and she's kind of looking up this way. That means that the neckline is visible, and that's a big check mark, because the stomach is also invisible. Even if she was kind of bending forward, very little of the stomach would be visible, but here we have a full range, the full length of her torso. So that foreshortening that you think is caused by this angle is actually a bit exaggerated. So we have to raise this up a little. And the reason why you might have caused this is because the canvas was essentially too low. Okay, so who here notices their drawer's anxiety, and in what ways? What ways did you guys notice it? For me, it's the edge of the canvas and the empty canvas, like the white canvas. Freaks me out every time. So what I'm doing now is I'm tilting this forward, increasing the head size, and just raising it up. Okay, and you'll see that it's a small fix, I know, and a lot of people like to say I talk too much when I'm doing my critiques, but I have to cover the entire landscape of mistake making that's behind this one tiny mistake, because believe it or not, it's not just this tiny mistake. It starts in the mind, it starts in the brain, it starts in your anxieties, it starts in a lot of ways. It feels more like dread than anxiety some days. Yeah, absolutely. It's got different ways. For me, sometimes there's panic. I've been trying to perfect my my kind of line art, I guess we can call it, and I have a panic. I have a severe panic that I feel if the line isn't perfect. There's the anxiety of the fact that I have to make sure I'm using as little lines as possible. That leads me to stressfully monitor my lines. Sometimes I have a good line and I'm just too much of a perfectionist to realize it's just fine. Sometimes I think about when I'm drawing with my anxiety, and in a sense it's coming. It's not a diagnosed anxiety. It's just if you're drawing, you have it. I notice that, oh shit, I have so much more left to do. I have so many other lines to make. I have so much detail to make. There's so much coming up. That kind of just freaks you out and stops you from actually finishing the drawing. So that's something I definitely have. Anatomy, Isis says, that gives her fear. I don't like not knowing when it's wrong. That's a big one, Nick. That's definitely a big one. And that kind of understand that one as well. Sometimes I know exactly the anatomy that's expected of me. I know all the muscle groups that I need to place in, but I just don't know where to start. So figuring that out is the hardest bit. Sometimes starting in the face is always a great place for me, but I sometimes want to express a certain twist in the torso, and I want to start there, but starting there means I've thrown off the shoulders, and throwing off the shoulders. And eventually that kind of freaks me out entirely. It makes me make mistakes I never usually make. So identifying your anxieties and where they're sourced from is really, really good for the health of your painting and the longevity of your painting, meaning that whether or not you're going to finish it, identify where it's starting, why it's there, and there are many techniques that we take in order to make sure that we're not going to be caught in the trap of the anxiety. For instance, trying gesture lines, answering all the questions when it comes to design. So I used to just get caught in the costume. I used to not know how to paint the costume. And what I would do is I would do the sketch for the full naked body without considering costumes. I'm done drawing the full body, and I'm done with the line art. I'm finished, and I'm ready to go into applying some characterization through costumes. I have no idea where to start because I took care of all the anatomy anxiety that might come up in drawing the full body of the character, but I didn't think about how the costume factors into the silhouette. And so all over again, I have to start erasing away at the perfect line. So I used to do that a lot. Now I do everything in the rough stage, from the hair to the armor to the direction of the lean. Everything is just considered. Gesture lines, where I'm going to place the eyes, where I'm going to place the nose. I used to just leave that for the final polish layer, but now I have to do it. This is just for gesture drawing, by the way. But yeah, pretty much going to open up here. Pretty much planning is the best thing to do, and it helps alleviate some of the stress caused by the units in this painting. So that might be one thing, and I really wanted to discuss anxiety once and for all. It is there. A lot of artists have it. I mean, a lot of us are really emotional people, so we're really going to be very, very susceptible to experiencing or the art stage. The canvas is a great stage for that anxiety to come up and start causing some trouble. So that's something you really should look out for. So let's take a look at planning and how much of a benefit planning has. These tiny little mistakes that you could have avoided could have been completely taken care of if there had been planning. Or you have to ask yourself, where is it sourcing? Is it sourcing from anxiety? Whether or not, wherever it sources, you have to start planning around it. So I'm just making this seamless. Sorry if I'm a little out of breath. I had to run over to the computer. Before, after. See that? It's like she's walking under a really low hanging tunnel. And she's kind of like, shit, I can stand up straight, but there isn't enough space for my head. And that's why it felt a little claustrophobic, just releasing the neck and allowing it to sit there. Overall, the gesture itself is very unusual. It's a fully symmetrical gesture other than the leg, which has made this entire area very, very empty. And it's kind of added a little stress for the staging to have this specific area just empty. So something that could have been better is just to let her leg go. There's no reason why she should be lunging if the lunge itself hasn't been shown in the side view. Sometimes a lunge is great to show when you can show the real gesture of the lunge. When you're lunging forward, it's more of a side view. We really get to appreciate the lunge from the side view, right? This is where the lunge is really, really visible. So if she was doing a lunge or some sort of acrobatic thing, you don't want to be looking at her from the front, because a lunge from the front is really, there's the foot, and then the leg is in the back, and then the hand, and then the sword, let's say. You don't see anything. It's still straight, because from front view, you don't get to appreciate the side view gesture lines that are visible. By changing your perspective. So I really don't see that this bent leg is doing anything for the painting. I feel like it's just causing some trouble. I'm going to try to get this leg and just turn it over here. And you can see it's a little bit more appealing to have her just do that. So she's kind of like a succubi or succubus or something, but not so much that like you're forcing it at this point. The costuming, her beauty, all of that will take care of the fact that she's supposed to be a temptress or an enchantress or something like that. She doesn't have to be like lifting that leg up like a tropical bird, like a flamingo. Really, it feels very more awkward than it's doing, and then doing anything beneficial for the painting. So ask yourself, do I really need this gesture here? And that's another thing that might be telling me that you're not spending enough time practicing your gestures. The fact that the canvas felt a little low and this awkward little leg. It felt like you really just started at the face and just kept going down. You started rendering the face and you just transferred it all back down. One thing to do is, again, to test and try different gestures. Just try different ones, see if they even work together. I still feel like the head could go a little bit higher. Let me try one more time to see if a bent leg really does work for the forward bent back. I mean, you can try different combinations. You can have the exact same gesture, different legs, one arm is a little bit different. It's just with this head facing forward, it's a little bit awkward. It's not in 3/4 view, even though it should be. It just felt like you started from this angle and you just kept going down lower. You can tilt her head just a little bit so she can feel a little bit more playful. But if it's just really, really awkward to do that. Okay, merge that down, and let's just take another full before and after so we can see these changes. It's a shame that these tiny little changes are standing in the way of the success of a fully rendered painting. Your colors are wonderfully chosen. You're using cool, some of these are kind of warm, these reds, but you get away with it. You're using cool reds. All your colors are balanced. It's a beautiful piece, beautiful design. You put a lot of work into it, and these tiny little mistakes are standing in the way of the success of the illustration. It's a really, really awkward bent leg. If she was lunging forward, that should have been something you spent like an hour on just in your gesture lines, practicing different ones. And this is a piece of advice I give to everyone. If you are doing gestures and it's a moving gesture, remember I have a distinction. There are open gestures and closed gestures. And I did cover this in my figure drawing book, which I might put back up. I'm not sure. But I did cover it. A lot of you know about the way I describe open and closed gestures. But an open gesture is a gesture that is part of a greater animation. Write that back to me. That means that, all right, please make sure that the topic is the discussion topic is related to right now. Okay? Where are my mods? Are my mods present? Abu, are you present? What was I saying? So yeah, an animation that is it's representing the motion more than a still image. So what you have to do is look for a video that's really similar to what you're painting, and from that just study different rotations, study different frames of that motion before the lunge happened, when the leg was at its apex, and then when it went back down, what happened to the torso, what rotated, are we seeing the side view of the body, the front view of the body. These are all really, this is stuff you don't get to experience in a still image off Google. You have to look up a video. So please make sure that you remember the open gesture is part of a greater animation of movement. And this is, if this was a lunge, if you really were going for a lunge, the forward body had to, I mean, a side lunge is pretty, it's like a pivot or something. So your body would have fallen forward anyway if you were doing a side lunge and your body was leaning forward. So let's just get a, so if you're doing that, you have your shoulders, you have one leg, and you're doing like a pivot like that. And then you have one leg like this. So this is the extreme of that pivot. Both hands can reach the floor. But you chose a very, very awkward starting point, an awkward frame in the animation. So remember, there's the greater motion, whatever the motion is going to be, and then there's the animation frames that make up this final motion in the video. And you're going to choose the keyframes is what you're going for, and that's what you study. You're not going to choose the in-betweens. This feels, at its best possible version of this, so we kept the leg up and we fixed the neck, it still feels like an awkward in-between frame of a motion rather than the extreme. So let's say you're taking a picture of someone and they actually accidentally blinked. You're not catching a keyframe, you're catching the in-between. If they're in the half blink, which is not a decent thing, or it's not a an ideal picture when you're blinking or half blinking in the picture, you look like you're high or falling asleep or something. It's the same kind of awkwardness I'm talking about. So make sure that either you went for this full one, and she would look really cool in this, and her hand up here, and her hand has the spell. But when it comes to full splashes, League of Legends splashes, posters, full illustrations, do not choose the in-between frames of the animation. Make sure that the gesture that you're choosing is the keyframe gesture. So write that back to me. Always illustrate the keyframe. Always choose the keyframe gestures for your final illustration. And you don't know what the keyframe gestures are unless you break down your reference in the video. Look up anything. Like just look it up. I'm sure it's there. Usually my recommendation is, if you can't find a good video reference of the animation, the best thing to do is like search it up, like how to do a lunge, how to do a pivot or something like that. Track and field how to. You find the most amazing referencing. Running how to, running form, best form for running. And these people have like zoomed out full body referencing of how to run. They zoom into specific muscle groups in really good form. Look up how to do a bicep curl if you're painting a strong man who's punching someone, or look up how to punch or how to kick. You find all the references you need. To think that you could do all of this with a still reference from Google is probably the biggest mistake you can make with regards to your final illustration. This is going to get dressed up. This is going to get presented. It's going to be on your portfolio. So the best thing to do is this is how I could salvage this illustration, but ideally I would just change a lot of what's going on. If I could go back to the blueprints and start all over, I would make you change the entire pose. I'd make it give me like 17 different poses, and then we get to choose from some of them. So let me see, one last little thing you could do to fix this is just have her standing up. So this is the one thing you could do right now to get a keyframe illustration. So a keyframe gesture. So before, you could keep it like this. It still feels really off, feels like her torso is sliding off her body. So what we're doing now is, kind of making it feel like a keyframe instead of remember that even if we polished it, it still looked like an in-between. So it starts to feel like a keyframe. Keyframe meaning an important, pivotal frame of the animation. So what does keyframe mean? Can anyone reiterate that for me? Why am I using the word keyframe here? What does this have to do with animation? So just someone re-explain it for me. I guess I can do this. Okay. So now it feels a little bit more like a keyframe. Feels like an intentional standing position. It doesn't feel like a forced. She still looks very active. She's got bent legs. She's ready to pounce forward. It's just a little less awkward than before, where we had the option of keeping her bending forward, but she had that bent leg, and then she had that tilted head, and then her head was like she was under a very like an overpass. I don't know what they're called. There's like a tunnel, like she's walking through the sewers and it's too short for her head. Okay, so this is what you want to do for your illustrations. The canvas itself is very, very short. I would raise this up a little bit higher. Remember, a standing character needs a long canvas. Now things feel a little less awkward. So remember, before it was a shorter canvas, not this long. Okay? So that's the importance. That's how we study efficiently. If anybody tells you, oh, wait till you're done portraiture to do some figure drawings, that's a big mistake. I mean, some people want to just focus on portraiture, but I used to just focus on portraiture, and the reason why that was problematic for me is I never took enough time to just topically brush over the basics of gesture line, that when I wanted to, after I painted a really great face and I wanted to add a body, I had zero visual library, like zero visual library for for any kind of basic gesture. All I had was 2 arms on either side and probably a good visual library for the anatomy of the shoulders and the breasts and the stomach and the collarbones. That's it. Even when it came to elbows or arms, I had no idea what I was doing because I never took it in a different, like I never studied it specifically and studied it efficiently. And again, going to Google and searching up a still image or going into figure drawing class or you know, when someone stands naked in front of you and you draw them, even then you have to be attentive to how they got to that position, how they got to that final frame, that keyframe they chose to represent. And if they're just standing there, it's not going to help. Just like if you Google an image and it's a still image, it's not going to help. Okay, so I'm just going to try to do this in the good old-fashioned way of before and afters. Before, stiff, awkward, imbalanced, and anatomically incorrect, disproportionate, improportionate, whatever, and just a little bit boring. There's nothing wrong with having symmetry if you have anatomy. If for some reason it's tilted over, let's look at a map of this. So we've got like we've got a scale, and let's say the scale was a little bit imbalanced. We had some great drawing, and we had some, you know, really, really great stuff, but the scale was tilted all the way down, where up here we had no anatomy, we had all that stiffness and all that other stuff. So this alone, you still have an imbalanced scale. You still have an imbalanced image, even though you've got all your points over here. If you make it symmetrical and boring and 2 legs down, this goes back up, and this gets to be a little bit more balanced. Even if it's boring, you still have a nice balance on either side. You've got all your aesthetics and all your fundamentals. Let's say this one represents aesthetics, surface stuff, and this represents fundamentals. So you had all these fundamental mistakes over here, but you had all this topical business. You had all the hair done and everything. It was still an imbalanced image. I would rather go for this and have a boring, symmetrical pose than go for this and have this extreme imbalance happen in the painting. And it shows. Trust me, it shows. You don't get away with it. You don't look like a pro. And I'm just being honest with you here. Honesty is the road to success in this when it comes to critique. You don't look like a pro when you make mistakes, beginner mistakes on a fully polished image. I don't care who you are. There's actually someone I want to name right now, a really successful artist. Everybody knows who he is. But he has the most fundamental mistakes on his portraiture. Whenever he paints anything, I'm just like, oh my God. Like, how did you skip that day? How did you skip that month that you were supposed to be doing portraits? I mean, your colors are great, your textures are great, your illustrations are great, the ratios are great, the composition is wonderful. He's a successful, amazingly successful artist. Everybody knows who he is. And then I look at his work and it sticks out like a sore thumb whenever he tries to do a portrait. And he's done portraits before, but he's hidden the faces, and it's very, very obvious. Trust me, when you're a pro, quote unquote, celebrated artist on the internet, and you make these fundamental mistakes, you don't get away with them either. So please remember, it doesn't hurt to spend 1 week just doing some gestures. Start it now. It's not, don't say I'm going to start it next year. I'm going to dedicate 2018 to gestures. You start it now. You start it today. If your mind is not picking up on simple gestures, then you, I'm not going to call him out. I'm not going to give you a name. But I was so tempted to take one of his work and critique it. But my friend rightfully said, don't do that because his fans will be all over you. But I really want to critique his work. I would feel very cocky in doing it. But as an example for my students, I really wanted to. I'm not going to do it, obviously. If I do, it's with his permission. But yeah, please spend some time doing your work, doing the real work. This is where it matters. All right, for this piece, it's just a simple presentation thing. If this was in your portfolio and you're just basically drawing for assets, you want to get hired to do assets for basic games, illustration to send over to a modeler to have for like the updated skin of League or something like that, and you wanted to just represent different assets in the map or let me see what the hell I'm doing. Is it horizon line starts there? What you want to do is just keep the background gray. The reason why we want to do that is because we've created a visual and like a light environment, and we've created a layout. And if that layout doesn't match the rest of the assets that are going to be beside it, when you lay this beside other assets, this is going to be green filtered. It's going to look really icky. So you want to know, you want to find out, is this green background causing some trouble for the colors that I've chosen? And it is. It absolutely is. The green isn't helping unify your colors. If the background has color, it's creating a wash. It's creating an atmosphere. It's deciding whether or not these colors can exist. It's the color of the environment, the combination of the humidity and the colors surrounding. So when we do this, we find out, hey, what happened here? So let me tell you what happened. The bark, the wood doesn't look like wood. It's very green. So what you need to do is adjust this color of the wood. You've already addressed the moss over here. The wood color is extremely green. And all of that compared to the green, to the stones, it feels just a little bit like these colors were here first or something like that. This color right here would be perfect. So that green wash that you had really hid a lot of the mistakes. It let you pass away with having a super green inner part of the texture. So remember, when we're doing texture studies, the color is part of the texture. It's part of the anatomy of the object. So this inside of the bark should typically be a grayish white, just like that. Yes, it's a green surrounding area, but it does not mean that we're going to be changing the ID of this. This is a wooden hammer. It's not a grassy hammer. It's not covered in moss. It just has some areas that have moss. So don't make, when you're doing assets like this, just don't make your backgrounds the color. Just leave them gray. It does not dress it up. It does not add to it. It does not increase appeal. So see how high it is close to the greens? We want it a little bit lower for bark. Just a little bit around here somewhere. So I'm just getting a color correction and getting rid of some of that green. That's really going to help the texture. When we do get closer to the moss, you can keep some of the green behind. But at least as a base tone color, outside of the light of the sun, which I'll bring in a second, you just want to give it its ID color. You just want to give it the color that it was supposed to have before we made the background green. All right, see how much more easy it is now to discern the wood from whatever was surrounding. So everything was too washed out. Okay, paint bucket. All right, so before, greens, too many greens on the inner portion here, and just after. Just quick corrections that change the behavior of the texture. You don't want to sacrifice texture if it's supposed to be a picture of an asset, you know, something that is, this is grass, this is wood, this is stone, and go ahead and model that according to these rules. These are specific objects we're referring to. We can't stylize them too much, especially from a distant view. If this is going to be seen, like I think it's called isometric view, like League of Legends. I'm not sure if that's the term for it. I could be wrong. Just correct me if I'm wrong. So then I'm getting a white yellow color on soft light. And I'm just going to place this over everything. The reason why we want to do this is the color of the sun. Take a look. This is the exact color I'm applying right now. This color. This color goes on top of everything. I'm doing it on a soft light, low opacity. It's a beautiful color. And we lay it on top of everything that the light touches. And this brings in that extra three-dimensional touch. Why do we have to get the exact color of the sun? Because that's a fundamental. The sun doesn't just give off a light, it gives off its color as well. So we get a white yellow that we brush over everything. That makes it seem like, yes, this really is all in the same environment. When we have varying environment colors, when we have like too much green on this section, some pinkish touch on here, we're giving off the feeling that this is a different object coming from different dimensions in space. So before, after. And then we go back and just erase wherever there were shadows, that's what we're erasing. So please apply these corrections if you can. They're very useful. Not sure why this part of the bark is so light. It's a 90-degree angle tilt. So it should be having some, this 90-degree angle tilt will create a cast shadow off the wood that you already had. And I'm just going to go back and clean up this edge. So I'm just worried that's a little bit too light for its, for some reason it looks right when it's light, but it shouldn't look right. It should look wrong because the light would touch this area. So this part of the wood would actually be a lot lighter. But for some reason it just looks right. I don't know why. That's weird. Sometimes you get shit that just looks right, and a lot of professionals have talked about this in the past in their tutorials. I used to read a lot of those when I was younger. And they used to say lighting is tricky. As long as it looks right, you kind of get away with it. So sometimes you do the wrong thing and it looks right. But really, the professional shouldn't be telling that to students, because students will go ahead and break that rule. Easy. They don't care. They're looking for any way to make things look pro without having to be pro. So look out for that. If you're one of those kind of students who's looking for a quick fix to your fundamental issues, you're not going to find it, because you have to know the rule first to know how to break it. Lighting, as long as your cast shadows fade properly, as long as you have general form, surface form, like 90-degree angle tilts and the edges that correspond to that, and the changes in lighting and all of this, as long as it looks like it's fundamental, then you get away with it. But you have to know what looks like it's fundamentally accurate. Do you know what I mean? So right along here, this needs to be desaturated. Again, so sorry about being so late today. I'll upload this video as soon as I'm done. And then these little dudes, I'm just going to give them some light. See how that green, it's just a little, it was a little too green. We never have a green that looks like that. We never have a background that's that green. Try to come up with it, unless it's like a green room, which is really weird. Why would that be the landscape setup, you know, for your illustration or for your asset? It's doing nothing for the portrait. I mean, it's doing nothing for the painting. On a gray background, you can really build up what you need. I'm not sure how these pieces here are shining, but let's just assume it's accurate. Okay, so presentation is a little more precise now, a little bit more clean. I'm going to saturate some areas. I'm going to get the sponge tool, find all the midtones, and saturate along the midtones. If you feel like you lost color, hey, you changed the background color, but now it looks dull. You shouldn't have been depending on the background to bring all the vibrancy back. You should have been doing this with your colors, with your proper colors, the actual colors on the painting. So all the instances where we have a midtone, I'm just going to go in and saturate it back. Flowers, the little glowy sparkles. Midtones just along here, so not on the highlight and not on the shadow, just on the midtones. That's where I'm going to bring in some extra green. I'm not sure if you're allowed, but a nice cast shadow moving off this way might help. I'm not sure if you're allowed. I'm not sure if all the cast shadows are supposed to be drop shadows in this game format that you're painting for, but this might help actually. This might help your painting. But we'll look at the before and after, and we can see that really there was nothing that green was doing for your paint. I'm just going to let you decide on that. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit more dodge work just over here. A little bit more shine along the rocks. Anything else that's supposed to be metallic should have that specularity difference on it, that distinction that it has a surface shine. That's shining the light back. Not enough to disrupt the focal point, but just enough. This piece is a 3D piece. I don't know if you know about, some people were asking. I just texted to make sure. I don't know what you're saying, Abu. It's a 3D piece. It's been painted three-dimensionally, or feels like some of this stuff has been hand painted. I don't know the process you went through, but this is all just presentation stuff. Anyway. Seems like you were hand painted some of these. It seems like you modeled it and then you went in and painted on it. Either way, it's you can do it. You can go back and paint after these corrections. But that background was not doing much for the painting. Okay? It didn't help identify where the horizon line was for that little patch of land. So then it was throwing these off in the distance, and now we have a little bit more upward climb. Now we have a z-axis because we can tell, hey, this moves up into the distance instead of it being as if the horizon line was doing this instead. So as if the horizon line was doing this, kind of like curving upward, like Inception style, instead of it actually being flat on the distance like this, which is always good to go for. Always go for that. It helps make your perspective a little bit more sharp, and it helps make that climb upward. That z-axis, not z-axis, this is a z, but if you look at it differently, an upward climb, a distance factor between the surface and the highest point in the altitude. Okay, so any questions? You can ask your questions now, by the way. Just make sure you write at Istebrak so I can find them. Would you say that a presentation of form and textures like this is a good time to use a tile canvas? Yes, when you present assets like this, a tile canvas is just fine because, as you can tell, the reason why I took off the background is because it wasn't an environment. It's either an environment or it's not. Write that back to me, guys. This is a serious fundamental. This is something you write up there beside all cast shadows blur the further they get from the light source. If it's not an environment, it doesn't have an environmental color. It's either an environment, an illustration with a background, in an open room with open lighting and a bounce light and ambient occlusion and all that business, or it's not. You have to identify which one it is. If you're not identifying which one it is, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to try to bring in atmospheric conditions on a painting that was supposed to not be treated as that, or you're supposed to give it a wider canvas, but you were treating it as if it had atmospheric conditions. You can still bring in some fog around here if you had to paint an eerie asset for a painting, for a game or something like that. You can still bring in a tiny little fog. It just means this is a tiny little example of what we're going to be having in the game. It's just a little cutout of an asset that we're going to have. It's not necessarily the environment itself. The game doesn't just center around this specific area. It's part of a greater environment. So it's just a piece that we took out, a piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire puzzle itself. Therefore, graying out the background is just fine. You can have a tile background. All right, you can have a tile piece. Remember, I said this before. The only reason why you can have a tile-shaped canvas is if it was like a graphics, like if it was some sort of graphical use of for bookmarks or for some kind of printout or for actual tiles. I'm not sure what you would use it for industrial design wise, but if it's just to send it off to a modeler so a modeler can start modeling the basic shape of the object, then the tile is just fine. If it's not an environment, it's either a portrait, and if it's not a portrait, you can use a tile. So if we were to add a background, what would we have to do? You have to extend the canvas if you wanted to add a background. You bring in that green back, but you have to identify whether or not that green is green all the way up here. This is not possible. There's light coming in from the environment allowing this visibility. So that means the light is going to come in from the top. There's a blue sky. That blue sky is going to change the color of the top half of the environment canvas. Why force yourself to do an environment if an environment was not expected of you? Environment stuff is for the final illustration. Sometimes they do bring in an artist that's like a concept artist for like an environmental, just someone to design the environment, decide the kind of day it is, the time of day that game, part of the game is going to be in, the kind of assets you're going to need in order to pull off that time of day, via fog or certain kind of lighting or lack of lighting, fireplaces, little pieces, whether or not the time of day allows even for floaty little fireflies. All of that stuff is designed as a big, large concept that someone just imagined really, really quickly, put it together, and everything about that game is based off that final choice. In the pre-production, that final choice of the illustration that they painted. They work off of it. They pull off the inspiration of the artist that created that illustration, just as a mock-up from what the writer was telling them. Do you understand? So it's not, this is not all of that. This is just one part, one asset that you were going to use in the game, not the final illustration. This is just a prototype or some kind of little, I'm not sure what an artifact of the painting. I don't know. Okay, so we have this piece here. it's a reference piece, so it's a little bit of everything today. I'm going to jump in between fundamentals. I like to stay close to fundamentals and just try to keep it all in one lesson, but it's just a tiny little suggestion or two regarding this. But any final questions? The blue floaty things against the gray background are hurting my eyes. Do you know why? Is it because of the saturation? They're hurting your eyes because they're not possible. The only way they would be possible is if it was this dark. Okay? So the floaty pieces are they should have been floaty in the dark area, and they would have illuminated just fine. They're not possible in this because the reason why I kept them is because I didn't want to keep erasing away what you painted. But they're not possible in this kind of light environment because this kind of light environment is this bright. After the halfway point, after like this line down, so this line down is nighttime values. All right, your sky should never be darker than this if you're going for daytime. Never darker than that. I mean, yeah, actually, yeah, it can be daytime stormy up here, but like around here and lower, it's dark, and that's when you can have floaty little secondary light sources come in and act as a primary. But these tiny little lights against the primary that's shining on the top, like let's throw in a spotlight. They would not be possible. That's why it's hurting your eyes. So you see, you guys do know all the fundamentals, you just haven't given them a term yet. You look at these fundamentals every single day, and you know what you're looking at. So I'm throwing in a soft light, and these might have to be rearranged somewhere around, let me unlock this, somewhere around here along the dark bits. Sorry about the grossness in the back. And then you can have the appropriate amount of visibility on the area that is under the spotlight. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Like really losing. Okay, so that spotlight is there. And then in this dark area, oops, you can have the floaties. Okay, so the spotlight looks nice because at this point it's just like imagine you're going through a museum and you're looking at little what are they called? Those little things that you look at in a museum. I don't know, like showpieces, and it just has a little spotlight. This is not an environment. This is just you saying, you know, this is just some light shining on my little design. Please pay me. Okay? And at this point, you can get away with having these floaters on the sides if you wanted to. You don't have to have that carry all the way up. You can just have it close off right at the top. It's just about creating a more believable source for the light source without having an environment. So this is a kind of a cheat. You don't have to have the horizon line and the sunlight and the sky color and you know, all that crazy business. A simple spotlight could have just proven that this is just a model rotating in a museum in a glass case, and it's just a demonstration. All right, because that's what these assets are, demonstrations. Any more questions? It's okay, Livy. Google isometric tiles. Yeah. I want all my art to say, please pay me. It will if all your fundamentals are in place. If your fundamentals are in place, your presentation is mature. Where this person had their presentation, it really was taking points off the final professional look. So remember, there is like a look that you have, like a final look in your work. Did I close it? Why didn't it save the history? Oh, shit. Oh, fuck, I lost it. I don't know what happened. I don't think my history is all the way back. I think I just lost that work that I just did with the spotlight. It's okay. It's still there in the history of the video. Alright, I don't know what I just did. I hope I don't do it again. Yes. Alright. But yeah, if you had that big gray background in the back, that was taking points off that professional look you were going to be... you were going to have if the painting was perfect. Livy's apologizing for things she didn't even do now. Don't strain your voice. If you need to call it a day, it's fine. You can always make up for it on Thursday or next Tuesday. Oh, no. It's okay. Why isn't this letting me scroll up? Come on, Google. What the hell? Okay, Okay, blue floaty things against the background, okay. Is it a good idea to study with a partner? Of course it is. Community, that's part of the, the bigger picture. I've always talked about the importance of community. So if we were to add a background, what would we have to do? Decide the time of day, what time of day it is and how that's affecting the visibility of other colors. What's the light environment? What's the wash that was reflected by that light environment? I've covered this in other videos. It's really extensive, and you kind of don't understand what I'm saying unless you see it demonstrated. It's hard to explain with words only. All your colors are chosen after you choose your initial wash. You decide on how dark you're going to go for the cast shadows. And then you have to have a horizon line. You have middle ground, background, foreground. You have atmospheric fade. You have depth. You have stacking. All the units of depth have to be used in order to pull off in the landscape environment. Adding a background, it's not just add a background. It's create a universe. It's create a world, an earth that responds to or is the stage for your main object. So you have to address all the scientific factors that go into creating a world. And they're they're easy to count. You can count them with your hands and toes, with your fingers and toes. It's not that populated in difficulty, I guess, when it comes to painting. So I'm just looking for the questions. Okay. No more questions? What if we had to add a background? What's the best way to still create an interesting focus, like inner portion, without mudding colors and such? We had to add a background. You can create like a gradient. You can have a gray background on the tile as you're going. You can have a slight little indication of where the light environment is happening or the background color above the horizon line. If you had to add a background, which is really, really misguided and stupid, if the employer is forcing you to bring a big full green background like that. But if you had to, make half of that background above the horizon line of the object along here, make that blue, and then just keep the ground green, or not blue. It doesn't have to be blue. It just can be like the background, the sky, and where the horizon line is. Keep it a close horizon line, just less saturated, and some of the sky to indicate the presence. But that's it. I wouldn't carry it all the way to the edges at all. I would still keep it as a tiny little closed off asset, like an exhibition. Okay, so no more questions. Your videos changed my life, and now I'm drawing every day and all the time. That's really good, Ari. Along with working hard to get rid of my line dependency, open up my eyes for the better. I'm very, very happy it's helped you. When is it okay to start with masterpieces? I've been studying and drawing for many years, but haven't done many masterpieces. Don't know where to start. A masterpiece requires a narrative. As long as you're planning one, it's to start whenever. The problem is, the one good thing about a masterpiece, if you're doing them early, is that they reveal to you what you don't yet know. But masterpieces, for now, I keep them either on an employment basis if I have to paint a masterpiece, or an inspirational basis if I have a narrative I really want to express. So ask yourself, do you want to paint a masterpiece right now? Do you want to put your skills to the test? If you do, be ready for the fact that there is a lot of stuff you haven't yet practiced, and it'll be difficult. One really good thing about a masterpiece, as well as revealing your mistakes, it helps build your threshold. It helps build your patience and how much time you're spending on a piece. So that's another good benefit of doing a masterpiece, but do them when you're ready. Reason why I say I'm against masterpieces is for the sake of making sure you have more time in for your studies. So at the end of the day, Rosa, if you have, I don't know if I can call you Rosa. Can I call you Rosa? Rosalinda, if you have, if you're spending more time on a masterpiece than you are studies, at that point, stop. As long as you have more studies in a week versus the masterpiece, if you have to do it for some reason, employment or school, of course you have to put priority on the masterpiece, but for your own personal adventure, make sure that whatever on your road to creating the masterpiece, you find a mistake or you find something that you haven't studied, you stop it and you go and study it. Find some research, find some referencing as you need it. Which would be easier, draw the portrait first, then the background, or draw the background first, then the portrait? When you're doing your rough stages, address how wide you want the background to be. That should be, if you're doing the portrait, it's a vertical canvas right off the bat. Then you can decide whether or not you're going to keep it gray. If you're going to keep it gray, don't worry about light, environment, color. If you're going to keep it in an environment, so a window and a table nearby, then you have to draw in you have to decide how bright the environment is going to be, where the light source is coming from. So you can plan a lot of this in your rough stage. You should never be the smartest person in the room. Go to a community you can learn from. Exactly. If you're in that big fish in a little pond situation where you're the best artist in your school, you're not going to improve very much. Yes, Ashley, absolutely. Well, the first color that you lay in, so the question was, would you recommend starting with grayscale and then overlaying color when attempting to paint a subject under multiple light sources with different temperatures? Yes. When you do add the colors, add the color of the primary first. Add the wash, add the ID colors of the object, so if it's a green shirt or a blue bow or something, and then bring in the ambient light caused by either the bounce light or the ambient occlusion creating those secondary colors. Those secondary shadows by the secondary light source. Grayscale to fix your values, Amy. It's been bugging me. What's better, grayscale to color or starting straight or straight to coloring? Straight to coloring, the color will get in the way of finding your mistakes, form mistakes, whether or not you're using edges right, whether or not you have cast shadows. So to get all that stuff out of the way, especially if it's going to be a masterpiece, go for grayscale first. How do you feel about black and white landscapes? But a colored main object? That's more of like a stylistic kind of deviation. It might be nice to do. It just depends on the situation. But if you're painting grayscale, that's just a standard for background, foreground, middle ground. I don't know how do I feel about black and white landscapes? I don't feel anything about black and white landscapes. Like on a colored object, so the main person is a color and the background is, I'm not sure what you mean. All right, so let's start smudging. Why we want to smudge? The smudging because the light source, this is a really, really important topic, so try to focus on how I'm describing it because it's really difficult to explain, to imagine. Imagine the light source. The light source has a texture. It's a non-existent texture, but it's fuzzy. All the shadows that it casts are fuzzy in response to that. So imagine the light as the positive space, and the negative space is where the light isn't. That negative space is reflecting the texture of the, this is so confusing, of the light source. Meaning, the more we smudge, the more that we reflect the texture of the light source. So when we're smudging like crazy, and we start our plate nice and smudged, our edges are still intact, but we're blending, what we're doing is we're creating the illusion that the light source has a texture, which it does. In the painting, as far as we're concerned, I'm not sure about scientifically, but the presence of the light creates this fuzziness. And only one tool in your arsenal can create this, and that's your soft brush. Okay, when you're painting it, and of course you have smudge. Okay, so when we're smudging or we're painting with a soft brush, we're creating the illusion that the light source has a texture. We also have another thing that's causing stuff to blend together and smudge out. Our eyes. Our eyes are not the best cameras. We have very weak vision. And so when we smudge away at areas of detail, preserving only the edge work that's needed, again, we give off the feeling that this is really being looked at with eyes instead of it being a more stale or artificial version of the form, which it is. It's a painting. But we don't want it to look artificial. We want it as if we're really seeing this through someone's eyes. The white of the eyes is too, even if you drop tooled it, it's too light all around. It needs to be just a little bit darker. Okay, this edge right here, this is an organic edge, meaning it's an edge that is caused by the body. So it's going to be a little bit more fuzzy. Just around here as well. Some more smudging. The more clean everything is, the more separated the eyebrow is from the eyes, and the eyes from the nose, and the nose. It's really difficult to explain this texture thing. That's why it said it was so, it's just so hard to wrap your head around it. The more separated everything is, the less realistic it'll look. So what I'm doing right now is smudging. The lips are also not proportionate or similar to where the lips are in the painting. You can exaggerate smudginess even more in your painting as well. So what I'm doing now is I'm really bringing in the thickness of the eyebrow, but not without having introduced it first with that fuzzy texture. Just around these edges, squint your eyes and you can see there's a really, really large, expansive shadow. And it's necessary to place that in here as well. Squint your eyes again, you can see a little trail. Okay, some more smudging out here. Again, we don't want a perfectly clean separation, a lasso separation between all the features. And smudging is the only thing that'll really provide this combination between our weakness and our vision, and the fact that the light has a texture, and the fact that everything on her face is underneath a thick layer of oil, which we all have, that is causing this smudge to come through. Okay, especially around the nose, that edge is a little extensive. And this photograph doesn't really have the best situations for the light, for the light. So you won't be able to get a lot of edge work through because the light isn't directly on her face. The light, if there was edge work, we're basically seeing the shadowed side. We're on the eclipse side of the angle of her face. The light is behind her. So if any edge work happens, it's on the other side of the room, and we can't access that information at the time. And jump into liquefy and replace it's a little tip. It's a final like polish tip. It's not something you should be worrying about in your early stages of the portrait. Early stages of the portrait all have to be about your blocking in and your edge work. Okay. She is pursing her lips just a little, especially around the lips. This is how I know you have an edge problem. This needs to be all the way out here. That blending needs to be much stronger. This is another organic edge that's very messy. Lip skin doesn't just start, it's slowly introduced. Around here. So a lot of stuff was making this feel more artificial than it had to feel, and when we blend, we decrease that artificial feeling. That artificial feeling of lighting or this really fake magazine cutout version of the painting. When we do studies, we tend to over-exaggerate edges. They're not the good edges, they're not form edges, they're like bad edges in between all the features. They don't feel like everything is under a film of oil or something like that. And when we get the soft brush, and we get the soft brush to represent the light, we're doing it on a wide brush so that we get that texture. We're not bringing in any new information. Everything has already been taken care of. Take a look at what I'm going to do now. Bringing in light is bringing in the shadow with a soft brush like this is another way to represent the light's texture. Just this. Let me show you real quick what I just did. Before, after, not sure where that came from. Okay, before, after. Right, that's a tiny little touch, but doing that reflects the nature of the light source's edges. That the edges of what it can't reach inherit the texture of what of the edges of the light source. It's a very, very weird thing to explain, but once you're there, you're done your painting, and you do this final film of soft brush and blending, you'll see that the painting feels more organic, more realistic. Again, just out here, really, really wide soft brush layering in any area of shadow. Wide soft brush around the edges. Be careful with using tiny little brush strokes for hair. Remember, it's all about detail relief, so relief and then detail, and you have to work large to small when it comes to hair. Even here, we're not seeing every tiny little brush stroke. So this is a very, you followed the light and shadow patterns on the hair properly, but the texture is entirely unnatural. And again, it's adding to that artificial feeling. You're not really painting her, this Fisher character, you're painting an android version of her, or a non-realistic, even though you're going for a full photo study. What you want to do is capture the texture. So detail, relief, lots of relief, smudging, and then detail. Detail, relief, detail, relief, detail, relief, detail, relief, 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 all the way back down. Very minimal detail because we're in the shadows. Over here we're blending as well. And you'll see the before and after. It's quite a significant change. And it's just one of those tricks that I want you guys to remember when you're doing paintings. Even when you're doing like non-reference portraiture, you want that final soft brush layer on top of everything. Okay, so thick brush. And there are some rules that we can break when it comes to the photo. So the chin area can all be, again, to reflect the nature of the light source, zooming all the way out, getting that large brush, and descending the face into even more, radially, even more shadow. You see what we're doing? We're creating this very realistic framework, this realistic recession into the shadow on the edges of the face. I wouldn't, you see how her face blends in with the background? I would still darken even more so. You get away with these kinds of rule breaks. Okay, so again, another instance of bringing in the shadows color, especially on areas that are shadowed or shrouded under bone structure like the eye socket. Areas under the nose, you get away with doing this with your brush. We zoom out, we see there's this intense detail cluster here around the face. We'll look at the before and after in a second. This eye is in the distance. It feels like it's just a little bit more than what's in the reference, but her referenced eye is looking away just a little bit. She seems spaced out. And that would hide it just a little bit more and cast it in some more shadow. But yeah, if you have any questions, ask them now. Class is almost done. I really wanted to do 6 p.m. today, but it's just we got caught up doing some stuff. We're out of town, and then traffic, and then, oh gosh. That's a tiny town. I don't know where we even have that many cars. God. Okay, just looking for any more instances here of detail. It's a very bad photograph, but you're doing what you can. One more little large brush. See that? A large brush to kind of make that edge happen, feel a little bit more natural. So all the way up. Right. So that's what your soft brush is doing. After you get rid of all of that edge work that you need to do, you go back into your soft brush and unify everything under that film. If it's a little too if it's under detailed, and when I say overuse of soft brush, I mean if you're doing this with 100%. If you're painting with 50 to 60% opacity from start to finish with a soft brush, you're doing something wrong. The painting is going to look way too polished and kind of icky and gross. It's a very cheap feeling when everything looks like it's been airbrushed. What you want to do is block in first, detail, identify areas of focus, and when you're finally done, the final polish is when you get that large brush and you unify everything. It's a complete boost. Look at the eyes. It's like we gave off the texture of the light. It's like we're showing the track of the light or the route the light took, but just with the brush. And that's it's a little trick. I haven't been taught this trick. This is a trick I picked up on my own. And I picked it up because I was doing this for so long. And I was like, why does it look like every feature is an island? How do I connect them without bringing in new shadows? Because the reference is telling me there's nothing connecting them. And then I realized in this moment of epiphany, it's not because I'm not blending right. It's not because I'm not doing everything proportionately. Everything is spot on where it's supposed to be. Why does it still look off? Because there was no surface texture. The word texture wasn't even in my vocabulary. And when it starts entering your vocabulary, that's when you start making realistic renditions of this face. It's not just a face. Here it feels like it's a two-dimensional face or some kind of 3D cutout or some kind of wax sculpture. But here it's considered all the dewy areas of the face, the oil, the reflection of the light back, the nature of the light source's texture, and its root. Yes, I extended the shadow here just a little bit. That's just because it's my taste. You can take it down. Of her eyebrow. I extended her eyebrow. It's not so much the eyebrow as the shadows the eyebrow is casting. There is some light reflecting back off the table that she's near, which I want to cancel out. Alright? So, let's see, any questions? Why doesn't it let me scroll? Oh, God. What's the best way to transfer a view or picture from overly detailed, like a one-for-one reference, to something that isn't cluttered and overly detailed? To transfer a painting that's overly detailed to not cluttered and overly detailed. Okay, so you keep all the main stuff. You keep edges that you require, like form edges. Those are vital to the structure of the painting or the mechanics of the anatomy. You keep those intact. You think about features that you want as the focal point. Only those areas can be detailed. I talk a lot about what shouldn't be painted with a 1 pixel width brush, like eyebrows, lashes, hair. So that stuff can also cause an over detailing. If you want to, go into your reference and blur out these areas so they just don't invite you to do it. That's really the best way to kind of counteract your desire to jump into your tiny details to pull off a read. I feel like that's what this person did here. They kind of just did all this crazy detail because they just weren't getting that feeling that this soft brush has allowed. They weren't getting that realistic glow, that realistic what's it called? Bloom, I guess. It's not a bloom in the sense of the light blooming, it's the shadow blooming. But yeah, just be attentive to what you can't render, what kind of detail you can't get away with rendering with a 1 pixel width brush. How do you start hair? With a very thick brush, a large brush. Paint the body of the hair and the chunks of the hair stuck together before you go into the small brush. Isn't the background color in this painting similar to what we should use on our 14-day challenge? I got comments saying the background was too light. This is too light. This is a little bit too light. I encourage you guys to work with this if you're doing 14-day challenge. Once you're advancing, you can kind of have a background that's this light, as long as you remember to keep your values appropriate. But for beginners, people who are training their values, please keep your values at around like D or something like that. D. There you go. Something like this, or G. I don't think there's G, is there? H. That's too high. I don't know what they are. E, D, C. Let me see what CC. This is also a good value for the background. It's a good skin tone value. That's why I recommend a little bit lighter than that. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm sorry I can't take any more questions. I gotta run. Next class will be on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. I'm so sorry about today's delay. I promise I'll try to make next class a little bit sooner than today's. But that's it. If you guys are interested in following me, go to my website, Istebrak.com. And then click on the little Google Plus icon. It'll take you to our community. Please make sure you read the rules. The rules are imperative. Instant bans if you post anything that defies the rules completely. If it's a mistake or you haven't posted properly, I deny your post, which goes through a filter. But I do let you know how to post it again so it can be approved. As for smudge brushes, I'm going to release my smudge brushes very soon. I've been working on them since January. They are the brushes that you combine on a scatter mode with your smudge tool on Photoshop, that gives you the effect of the blending that we covered today. It'll be just the same price, around $12 or so, or under that, similar to my brushes already on my website. But a lot of people have been asking for some scatter brushes approved by me. I'm going to be releasing them. I don't like releasing brushes right away once I've designed them. I like using them. I like putting them to the test. I'm also going to be releasing, along with my smudge brushes, any of the brush sets that were with the books that are no longer available, and some of the recent sketching brushes I've designed as well. One of them I've been working on for a month. It's one that I've been using for my sketching if you've been following me. I'm going to release that one as well. So as my brushes become available, as I research and fix them up and make them perfect, I'll release them as the year progresses. I don't like releasing brushes if I haven't used them for a while and really perfected the spacing and the scatter amount and the tilt and all that. But thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.